This tomato method did not come from laboratories, universities, or glossy gardening books. It was born out of necessity. In the Soviet Union, especially from the 1930s through the post-war decades, gardeners were not chasing record yields for profit. They were trying to survive unpredictable seasons, poor soil, seed shortages, and long, cold springs. Every plant had to justify its space. Failure was not an option. What emerged was a system radically different from modern tomato cultivation. Instead of pampering seedlings, Soviet gardeners deliberately stressed them early, planted them sideways, buried most of the stem, removed excess roots, and discouraged fast vertical growth. To a modern gardener, this sounds like abuse. To Soviet agronomists, it was controlled adaptation. The guiding idea was simple. Tomatoes are not fragile annuals by nature. They are semi-perennial plants capable of regenerating roots along their entire stem. When forced to adapt, they become stronger, more resilient, and vastly more productive. Instead of shallow-rooted plants dependent on constant watering and feeding, this method created tomatoes that could survive drought, cold snaps, and neglect. This approach was never marketed. It was passed from gardener to gardener, published in small agricultural bulletins, taught in collective farm manuals, and tested across millions of backyard plots. It worked not because it was elegant, but because it was brutally practical. Modern gardening forgot it because modern gardening values convenience and speed. The Soviet method values survival and long-term productivity. Those are not the same goals. The core of the forgotten Soviet tomato method is horizontal planting. Instead of planting tomatoes upright, gardeners laid the seedling almost flat in a trench, burying 60 to 80% of the stem under soil, leaving only the top leaves exposed. Why? Because tomato stems are covered in adventitious root nodes. When buried, these nodes transform into a massive secondary root system. This does not just increase nutrient uptake, it fundamentally changes the plant's architecture. The tomato becomes anchored, drought-resistant, and far less dependent on surface moisture. Soviet agronomists observed that vertically planted tomatoes developed shallow root systems clustered near the soil surface. These plants produced early growth but collapsed under heat stress, disease pressure, or inconsistent watering. Horizontally planted tomatoes, by contrast, behaved like perennial shrubs. They grew slower initially, but outperformed later in the season, sometimes dramatically. Another key detail: lower leaves were removed before burial, but the stem was not allowed to dry or harden. It was planted immediately to stimulate root formation under stress. This deliberate shock triggered survival mechanisms within the plant. Modern gardeners often fear stressing seedlings. Soviet gardeners relied on it. They understood that adaptation at the beginning determines performance at maturity. The result was fewer plants, but far greater yield per plant, often 2 to 3 times more fruit by weight. One of the most controversial aspects of this method was intentional root restriction in early growth. Seedlings were often grown in small containers or cramped soil conditions. This limited root expansion and slowed top growth. Modern advice warns against this. Soviet practice depended on it. Why restrict roots? Because unrestricted early growth creates dependency. Plants grown in ideal conditions become fragile. Soviet gardeners wanted tomatoes that could survive neglect, drought, and cold soil. By limiting early resources, the plant was forced to allocate energy towards structural resilience rather than rapid foliage expansion. Another forgotten step was the dry start. After transplanting, tomatoes were watered minimally, sometimes not at all, for the first 7 to 10 days. This forced roots to search deeper for moisture. Once established, these plants required dramatically less watering for the rest of the season. This method directly contradicts modern drip irrigation logic.
but it explains why Soviet tomatoes often survived weeks of heat without irrigation, while modern varieties wilt quickly when water is interrupted. The result was not just survival. These plants developed thicker stems, stronger vascular systems, and better disease resistance. They produced fewer early fruits, but significantly more total yield over the season. Quantity came from endurance, not speed.
Another forgotten element was aggressive pruning, but not the kind promoted today. Soviet gardeners removed lower branches and excess shoots relentlessly, not to shape the plant, but to limit energy waste. They believed that tomatoes naturally overproduce foliage when nutrients are abundant. This foliage competes with fruit development and increases disease risk. Instead of feeding more to support bushiness, they reduced the plant's options. Fewer stems meant more resources directed into fruit clusters. Interestingly, they did not chase uniformity. Each plant was pruned based on vigor and response. Weak plants were left alone. Strong plants were pruned harder. This adaptive approach required observation, a skill modern gardeners often outsource to fertilizer schedules and instructions. Combined with deep rooting, this pruning strategy resulted in fruit that ripened more evenly, resisted cracking, and had higher dry matter content. Tomatoes were denser, more flavorful, and stored better, a critical advantage in climates without refrigeration. This was not aesthetic gardening, it was functional agriculture, focused entirely on output, storage, and reliability. The Soviet tomato method disappeared not because it failed, but because it did not fit modern systems. It requires patience, observation, and tolerance for early season ugliness. Modern gardening culture favors instant success, visual perfection, and minimal effort. This method also conflicts with commercial seed marketing. Stress-adapted plants do not require constant feeding, watering, or replacement. They are independent. Independence does not sell products. But climate change is rewriting the rules. Heat waves, water restrictions, unpredictable springs. These conditions resemble the constraints Soviet gardeners already faced. Their solutions are suddenly relevant again. This method teaches a deeper lesson. Plants do not need comfort, they need adaptation. When forced to struggle early, they learn how to survive later. Tomatoes grown this way are not fragile crops. They are resilient organisms, capable of extraordinary productivity. Garden Lore Vault exists to preserve exactly this kind of knowledge. Methods that were never patented, never branded, and never optimized for profit, only for survival. The Soviet tomato method was not lost, it was ignored. And in an unstable future, ignored knowledge becomes priceless again.